desire and the dream to return to Israel is not a product of colonialism or racism or whiteness. It's just literally the dream that we should live at peace in a land of our own. So anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, it's an ideological virus that's infected the entire world at this point.
Well, welcome to the podcast today and to our series, Battle for Truth. Our topic today is the question, is Zionism racism? And as our guest, we have with us Monique Beadle, Director of U.S. Policy and Advocacy from the Jerusalem Institute of Justice. She is a human rights attorney with 19 years of experience in international affairs, asylum and refugee issues, and the rights of victims of human trafficking, torture, and sexual abuse. As a grandchild of Holocaust survivors from Germany, she has spent most of her career advocating for other people in Thailand, Ukraine, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. She recently joined the Jerusalem Institute of Justice, where she has joined her own people in an existential struggle for survival. JIJ is an Israeli human rights organization based in Jerusalem, and for 20 years, they have fought for the rights and well-being of vulnerable people in Israel and the Middle East. Within Israel, JIJ provides free legal aid to survivors of human trafficking, Israeli civilians who have been internally displaced since October 7th, and new immigrants arriving from around the globe. Outside of Israel, JIJ is the only Israeli human rights NGO with United Nations consultative status that is pro-Israel. JIJ's team of advocates in Jerusalem, Geneva, and New York are defending Israel's legitimate standing in the community of nations. Monique is based in the New York area, where she represents JIJ at UN headquarters and on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. Monique, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jeff. It's good to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you with us, and I've been looking forward to meeting you, although virtually in this instance, but it's been great to hear you on some of the webinars and things that we've been listening to since this horrific thing that happened on the 7th of October. But let's get a little background about you. Can you please just tell us a little bit about the experiences that led you to do the work that you're now doing at JIJ?
So my whole life, I've drawn in really intense inspiration from my grandparents. They escaped Hitler's plans for them, and they really devoted their lives to serving others. So my grandfather, Jerry, he established our family law firm, which helped Holocaust survivors recover their stolen assets from Swiss and German banks. Oh, wow. And my great-grandfather, Ernst, he set up his medical practice in Harlem. And that was a place where his African-American patients weren't going to discriminate against him for his German accent. So they created this model for me of building the Jewish community on the one hand and serving the needs of other types of minorities on the other hand. And this was sort of a mode of defiance. So throughout all of the twists and turns of my career in the human rights world, working with, persecuted minorities from around the world, the reality is that the fact that I'm an unapologetic Zionist has always been something of a liability. So I joined JIJ, which has really been at the forefront of effective human rights advocacy in Israel for 20 years now. And I really have come to think of it as a way to reconcile the two sides of myself and to walk in the footsteps of both of my grandfathers and not just one or the other. So I'm really honored I'm actually a pretty new addition to the team, having joined the team on October 7th, and really have been drinking from a fire hose ever since.
No kidding. Well, it is great to have you as a part of the team. We certainly are thrilled that you have come alongside Flavia and Lydia and Uri and all the others that are working there at JIJ. And what a legacy. Just to hear that little bit of background of your story, it really must give you a sense of passion and purpose in this work that you're now doing. Thanks so much for sharing that. We're dealing with this question today of, is Zionism racism? And this term is something that I just find completely mind-boggling. This idea that somehow if you're a Zionist, you're a racist. I've been to Israel. None of this adds up for me. So talk to us a little bit about where and why did this kind of idea originate, and what was the motivation behind creating this false claim?
So I think that when people say this, they don't realize that they're actually parroting Soviet propaganda from the 1970s. It was actually the Soviets who coined this term. So they coined it out of a sense of frustration with basically their failure to undermine the still very nascent and fragile state of Israel. Israel at that point had successfully repelled a coordinated attack of 5 Arab armies that were allied with Russia. That was first in 1967 and then again in 1973. So I want to jog through some of the milestones of the 20th century in order for this to make sense. So we should remember that Europe spends the better part of the 1930s and 40s purging itself of its Jewish population. And then the Middle East and North Africa, they spend the better part of the 1950s and the 1960s doing exactly the same thing. So many people may not know, but Baghdad in Iraq actually used to be about 30 to 40% Jewish. So that's an even higher than the current Jewish population of New York. So Baghdad, for all intents and purposes, was a Jewish city. But in 1941, as the Nazis were prosecuting their war of annihilation of the Jews in Europe, there was the Farhud, which was a pogrom against the Jews of Iraq in 1941. And so it had a devastating effect on the Jewish community of Baghdad. So by the time you get to 1951, the Jews of Iraq have been totally driven out through pogroms, discrimination, and threats of violence. And the same thing has happened in Iran, in Yemen, in Morocco, Algeria, Syria, Lebanon. The entire Muslim world becomes Judenrein, which means free of the Jews. Mm-hmm. And so the Soviets are gaining influence in the Muslim world because it was yet another front in the Cold War. In the battle between the Soviets and the United States, the war wasn't actually fought. It wasn't a hot war. It was a cold one. And so it was fought through proxy battles in other countries. So part of this proxy battle was the distribution of Arabic translations of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion across the Arab world. So the Protocols are a fake Russian document that pretends to be written by Jewish leaders, and it explains the so-called Jewish conspiracy to control the world secretly. So this is the political backdrop of the Soviet campaign to delegitimize the young state of Israel. And it really all comes to a head in 1975 when the Soviets orchestrate this resolution in the United Nations General Assembly. And this resolution enshrines the term Zionism is racism. And unfortunately, this resolution wasn't retracted until 1991. So it really succeeded in poisoning the atmosphere for generations. I want to be clear here that not only is Zionism not racism, but anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. What is Zionism fundamentally is the belief that the Jewish people don't have to live forever at the sufferance of others. It's a realization that anywhere we've ever lived outside of the land of our ancestors has not been safe to us. Mm-hmm. Every single place we've ever lived has eventually grown tired of us and has purged us. And so as a result of this, we must have a land of our own if we're going to survive. Zionism also was not invented in the late 1800s by Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl obviously, succeeded in popularizing the concept and drawing support for the idea. But the Zionist dream is the phrase L'Shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim, which we say every single time we celebrate Passover. I mean, the desire and the dream to return to Israel is not a product of colonialism or racism or whiteness. It's just literally the dream that we should live at peace in a land of our own. So anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, it's an ideological virus that's infected the entire world at this point.
Wow. That was super helpful even for me. Because I was not fully aware of all of that background with Russia and the UN resolution in 1975. I'm shocked that it took 16